Jason Klom, and this is the Comedy on Vinyl podcast. The year is 1976. The album is Cletus Maggard and the Citizens Band, The White Knight. The artist, the true artist, is Jay Huguely, and my guest this week on what we're going to, I hope this is going to be a little mini-series that we're going to call Family Albums, where I interview the family members of people who created fascinating, sometimes obscure comedy albums. My guest this week on the phone is Rand Huguely. Thank you so much for joining me.
You're welcome. Happy to do it.
So Jay was your father.
He was.
And, okay, so here's the thing. I'm fascinated with CB culture and how it kind of took over comedy and just music in general. I'm curious. So I know that your dad, he was in advertising at one point. Was he in advertising before?
Yeah, well, it's funny because when you read anything that pops up online about him, or even on the back of the album jacket, he's always described as an advertising executive, and that was such a short, brief stopover in his life. He was a classically trained actor.
Yeah,
attended Royal Academy of Dramatic Arts in London, and I really grew up living backstage in dressing rooms, at dinner theaters all over the South. We would travel around. He was a director, an actor. He had a touring company, and we did that for years and years. And it's my fault, only because I became of school age, and my mother said, you know, Jay, we can't just live 3 months at a time in different places putting on Music Man and Man of La Mancha and all these plays. You're going to have to get a job. So he managed to land this job in advertising because it had a creative aspect to it, and he thought, well, if I'm going to do a desk job, I have to do something creative.
Sure.
But the truth is, he really was only there for about 18 months total, and hated it. He just was not built to be behind a desk. He was an entertainer. He was a performer, and was miserable in it, and then just accidentally stumbled into this.
That's crazy. That's the funny thing is, if you reverse engineer it, it throws you, because first of all, if you look at the jacket cover, there are 13 different versions of him standing around this truck. He's in all kinds of different outfits, including a colonial outfit, which I cannot explain, but I really enjoy. And then it's all the Citizens Band. It's all CB related musical humor. On the back, he's got this look that's just it's as country, it's as CB as you can get. And then if you reverse engineer it, this guy's done a good job. I mean, this is presentation at its best in terms of comedy albums, because the guy, again, classically trained.
Yeah, absolutely. And all of those, everything on the front cover, him and all the different costumes, all of that tracks to one of the songs that's on the album. So, like you mentioned, the colonial, there's a song on the album called CB76 where he imagines, what would our founding fathers have sounded like if they were on CB radio?
Oh yes, right, of course. Well, there we go. See,
you've got the guy in the Beaver Patrol shirt.
Yep.
The 50s CB rock, and the trooper standing right in front there that's the White Knight, and so that's where the idea came from. So
that's so funny.
But yeah, that look on the back, I mean, that's just him acting. That's just him giving a look of what he thinks this guy Cletus Maggard would be like.
Now, where was he originally from, your father?
So he grew up in eastern Kentucky, actually, in a town called Jackson. He was born in Richmond, but grew up mostly in Jackson, Kentucky, and really in hill country, coal country, and knew from a young age that he had a talent and was going to pursue it, and that ended up leading him to the scholarship to go pursue his training in London and so forth. And so, he left there, but he obviously kind of drew on those roots with all of these characters that he created on this album.
Where did he get the idea to make this album? I mean, other than let's capitalize on a trend, like, to go through the effort of getting the money and recording an album at the time, it was more expensive than it is now. I'm curious, like, what really solidified it for him to make this album at all?
Well, here's what happened. He made the single, The White Knight, by accident, and the album then followed after the single was successful. And when he was working at Leslie Advertising in Greenville, South Carolina, that was the day job that my mom required him to get.
Uh-huh.
They had Sears and Roebuck was a major client, and Sears was carrying a line of CB radios by a producer called Jim Tronics, and he was tasked with writing a jingle. That's what they used to call the songs that they play on radio commercials. He was to write a jingle for Jim Tronics. So he knew not the first thing about CB radios, spent half an afternoon sitting in a car with a borrowed CB radio, listening to people talk on the CB. And these crazy things they would say, and 10-4 and catch you on the flip side, and 7s and 3s to you, and all this other stuff. And he said, I have no idea what this means, but I think I can throw a few of those things in. And when you listen to the first verse of The White Knight, it's really just this guy kind of talking about driving along and listening to CB radio, and that's really what he wrote as the jingle. And they played it for the client. The client came in, they had a meeting, and just picture people in suits and ties sitting around a boardroom. They play this little jingle that my dad has come up with, and the client says, that's terrible. We hate it.
Oh, no.
We have no interest in this. You're fired as our agency. And they literally walked out of the meeting. So my dad is sitting there, and he's thinking, oh, God, I'm fired. And his boss is with him in the meeting, Bill Leslie, who owned the agency. Doesn't say anything for a couple of minutes. Looks like he's pondering something. Kind of looks over at my dad and says, think you can write 2 more verses in a bridge? And my dad says, yeah. And he says, they didn't like it, but I think that's a hit record. And that's a true story. So he went home, he came up with the full story idea for the song, which is this state trooper in Georgia who's conning truckers into thinking that he's part of the convoy, which was a major part, obviously, of CB culture, and then catching them, letting them in on the entrapment at the end of the song. So he puts it together. They hired some session musicians right there in South Carolina, recorded it, took it to a local radio station in Greenville, asked them if they would play it. My dad said, there is no way I am releasing this under my name. I don't know what this is. I don't know how this is going to be received. This could ruin my future career if I get back into acting or anything else. And released it under the name Cletus Maggard and the Citizens Band. And it starts playing like wildfire on the radio there in South Carolina. And I have very strong memories of my dad having myself and my mom and our friends call the radio station, and we had to call every hour and say, I want to hear that White Knight song by Cletus Maggard. And we just kept calling and requesting it. And it took off. It's one of those crazy American pop culture deals. It caught on. And the next thing he knows, he's got a record on the charts under his fake name, and people want to know who's Cletus Maggard and book him for events. And there is no Citizens Band; it doesn't exist. So that's how it got started. And then, obviously, at that point, Mercury Records comes in, signs him to a record contract, and asks him to fill out an album so they can release an album under the White Knight name, because there's a thirst for it at that point. People are looking for this album to buy, and one doesn't exist.
That's insane. It's so funny to hear basically the story of most early rock and roller and most like garage bands that ever succeed. It's like, well, there's this one thing that they didn't know if it would take off, and then like you're saying, it gets handed to a DJ. This is happening in what I'm assuming 75, since the album is 76.
Yeah, that's exactly right. All of that happens in 75, and then he records the album in like early 76.
That's hilarious to me. Now, was this, well, I guess I could actually probably tell myself if I just look on the back just to see where this was. Okay, recorded in Greenville, South Carolina. Okay. Got a full band, of course. I'm assuming studio musicians, or were these people he knew?
So these are studio musicians, and the White Knight definitely recorded in South Carolina, and you see that there on the jacket, Bob Hooper, WESE Radio. That's the station that started playing it. And then session musicians that were pulled together by Jerry Kennedy, who was high up at Mercury. They recorded. Basically, what my dad did is he came up with these ideas for songs, wrote these comedy lyrics, came in with the ideas and the vaguest of melodies, and all they really did is just play sort of very generic bluegrass tracks behind it, and recorded it in a really short period of time. Then he had to go out on the road, and my mother grew up in northwestern Kentucky on the Ohio River in a town called Owensboro, Kentucky, and he found a band there, and I don't even remember what they called themselves. They had some other name, and they were just a local bluegrass kind of cover band playing bars and playing weddings and that sort of thing. And he hired them to go on the road with him as the Citizens Band. And all of a sudden, there were real people here.
That's nuts. Now, how well did if you remember, how well did the album do?
So, the single obviously went to number 1. It actually went to number 19 on the pop charts, believe it or not.
Crazy.
Crossover hit.
Yeah.
As they used to say. And the album sold on the strength of the singles. There were only so many singles you were going to sell. They got the album cut and released as quickly as they could, and it sold well. And I don't remember, in numbers and if it was certified gold, but it sold well. There was another song on it, Kentucky Moonrunner, that was released as a single, and I think it peaked out like number 25 or something in that area. It did okay, and it just kind of faded from there. But for a good solid year, he toured regularly, and was easily as well known at that time as C.W. McCall. Today people still kind of remember Convoy and C.W. McCall.
Sure.
And I don't think anybody remembers Cletus Maggard, but they were on par for a while, and they even toured together. They played some double bills.
That's crazy.
Which kind of made sense. Yeah.
I apologize. I'm going to have to ask questions where you may not know the answer, but feel free to say I don't know. But do you know if it was he's playing a character, he's doing a thing that isn't him, but I mean, as an actor myself, I feel like that would be fulfilling, even if it was some weird, silly shit I was doing. Do you know if it was fulfilling for him?
Yeah, I really think it was. Look, first of all, it was financially rewarding.
Of course,
for at least a short period of time. There was a lot of adulation. He had fan clubs. What was really interesting is that, in the touring aspect of it, he really, I think, connected with those audiences, and that completely surprised him. He's been in the theater for years. You're performing to a different kind of crowd. Suddenly you're at a concert, and there were these CB clubs. The one I remember in particular were called the Baltimore Breakers, and they just loved him, and they would follow him around.
Oh, my God.
He wrote all these songs which, if you knew him and knew the kind of music he really liked and the taste that he had and so forth, he thought he hated country music, and he was kind of putting it down when he wrote the songs. But I think ultimately he developed a real affinity for truckers and kind of the profession and what they went through, and I think it became very rewarding. I mean, it was like being in a show. It was not that different than taking a play on the road, but it was more personal, and he had more connection with the audience. And you mentioned he had a second album. It didn't sell at all, but he really put more of himself into that, and he made, I think, a much greater effort to put out something that was called Two More Sides, and it's half comedy and half serious, and none of it's CB.
Oh my God! I was wondering. I couldn't tell from reading the track listing because it came out the same year. So he was busting his ass to get 2 records out. So one of them is one half is completely serious.
It's not like it's half the songs are serious, half the songs are comedy. They're interspersed. So it's not like there's a serious side and then a comedy side.
Okay, gotcha.
But it's a mixture. So you have a comedy song and a serious song, and a comedy song and a serious song. And the serious songs, he worked with another songwriter named Lynn Cheriaka, and I mean, he really was ready to kind of almost make a serious go of it as a country songwriter, something he never could have imagined.
Wow.
But unfortunately, the album didn't do well, although I would rather listen to that one than the first one, to be honest. The first one is fun, and it was popular, and it was part of this amazing wave